So we want to turn back to the GOP's efforts to overturn the results of the 2020 election. We talked a little bit about it with Ed right there. We want to bring in Weijia Jiang. She's at the White House to break it all down. So Weijia, we are talking about this lawsuit brought forward by the AG in Texas. Now other states have signed on, and the president wants to be able to sign on as well. What can you tell us about this effort, and how do most experts see it playing out in court?
So the Attorney General is asking the Supreme Court to accept this lawsuit to look at these 4 battleground states that ultimately decided the race. And in the meantime, he says those 4 states should not be able to submit the results that, by the way, these states have already certified. And so Attorney General Paxton of Texas is making the case that everything should be on hold until this lawsuit is accepted and plays out. And, after it does, that these states should be able to select their own new electors to submit those votes. So in short, to answer your question, it is hard to imagine that the Supreme Court will actually take up this case. They've already rejected a plea from Republicans in Pennsylvania to look at the results there. And, there have been other cases across the country in lower courts that have failed as well. And so we are still waiting for that decision. It hasn't been handed down yet. But I think the other really interesting piece here is the fact that the president today is hosting a private lunch with a dozen Republican state attorneys general, including Paxton of Texas, and all but one of them are among the 17 states that have publicly backed up this effort. And so the White House says this meeting was on the books for weeks. They were all going to come here, and the timing is just coincidental. But you can imagine critics believe otherwise. And by the way, as of now, it is a closed lunch, so we won't be able to be in there to ask any questions of the president or the attorneys general.
All right, so the other big issue, perhaps the number one issue facing this country, is the coronavirus pandemic. Earlier this week, President Trump suggested that if enough people die from COVID-19, then we won't need vaccines at all. I want to play some sound.
I think that the vaccine was our goal. That was number one, because that was the way it ends. Plus, you do have an immunity. You develop immunity over a period of time. And I hear we're close to 15%. I'm hearing that, and that is terrific. That's a very powerful vaccine in itself.
All right, so we want to know that in order to get to that point without a vaccine, nearly 290,000 Americans die and more than 15 million will have to become infected. We have seen President-elect Joe Biden taking a clear stance on the fight against COVID-19. Why is the Trump administration staying mostly quiet on the topic, other than occasionally bringing up the vaccine? The president patting himself on the back, and perhaps he should for, Operation Warp Speed, but we've heard pretty much nothing from him about the suffering, those who have gone without, those who have contracted the vaccine, those who have died. Why is he continuing to downplay this threat as the numbers soar?
Anne-Marie, that is a question that we have been asking since March, and there is no real clear answer. Before the election, it was obvious that the president wanted to keep the attention on something else, on the economy, on everything that he had done before this pandemic ravaged the country. But here we are after the election, and, in his mind, he is still fighting in that race, even though that race is over. And so perhaps that is an explanation, but, it's not arguable about the level of leadership that we are seeing from the president, that it is not what you would expect from the leader of a country whenever the country continues to grapple with these soaring numbers. And you're right, we have not heard him address the spikes. We have not heard him urging people to double down on mitigation measures like we are hearing from the doctors on his task force. And he has fewer and fewer public events, like we just mentioned, so it's difficult to ask him why and about what he's doing. And by the way, when we have had that opportunity, he does talk about the vaccine and almost immediately pivots to the fact that, his administration was able to get so much of a vaccine in a short amount of time, and that they are on the brink of approving it and getting it into people's arms. But that does not change the fact that we are going through this right now without a vaccine. And so, there aren't that many weeks left for the president to illustrate this type of leadership that we're talking about, to urge people, especially ahead of the holidays, to behave in a certain way to protect everybody. But it is sorely lacking and becoming more apparent as he holds himself up in the building behind me.
Yeah, and you know what, it's not just what he's not saying, it's also what he's doing. And he continues to hold holiday parties inside the White House with groups of people without masks on. The message is reckless, to say the least, considering these numbers.
Yes.
But listen, I have a lot of other things to talk to you about. So, in his final days in office, President Trump is racing through a string of federal executions. The first of 5 planned executions before Inauguration Day is set to take place today. His name is Brandon Bernard. He is set to be put to death for his role in a 1999 double murder. He would be the 9th federal execution of the year. There is a lot of support around him, though, and many people asking for the president to reconsider this. If the Trump administration moves forward with these executions, then Mr. Trump will be the country's most prolific execution president in more than a century. Are we hearing any plans at all to halt these executions?
Well, our colleague over at the Justice Department, Claire Himes, reported that there was no recommendation from the Department of Justice to the White House whether to move forward or not with this execution. But we do know that there are a lot of people in the public who are urging the president to stop it from happening, including Kim Kardashian West, who has played a role in the president's decision-making in the past when it comes to something similar. You'll remember Alice Johnson was serving a life sentence in prison. She was a 63-year-old grandmother. Kardashian intervened, and the president granted this woman clemency. And so now Kim Kardashian is tweeting 24 hours until Brandon Bernard is executed. Please keep calling and asking the president to commute his sentence. And so we haven't heard anything from President Trump about whether that is impacting his decision, about whether other voices who are supporting Mr. Bernard are influencing him at all. But time is running out because this is going to take effect, or supposed to take effect, tonight. And as you mentioned, this was a gruesome double murder. At the time, Bernard was 18 years old, and he, according to the Justice Department, set a car on fire that had 2 victims inside who had already been shot, and one of them apparently died from that, from smoke inhalation, and so he was sentenced to death. But that was quite a while ago, and it can be argued that the state of the country has changed, our social climate, and that there are things being done to move away from that for the U.S., and it's a question of whether the president wants to make a bold statement in this case and others, as you mentioned, moving forward, while he still has the power to do that.
Well, he certainly doesn't mind stepping in to help his supporters by issuing pardons. So we'll see if he's paying attention, or if he agrees with the pleas that we're getting, not just from celebrities, but also some lawmakers as well. Weijia Jiang, thank you very much.
Thanks.